doing. Oh, okay. So you can see it later on. The other option is Julian Adams has offered to give a relatively brief tour of 2nd Street, starting in about 10 or 15 minutes. So if you choose one or the other, we figured we have to do them in parallel because of timing. So Julian's in the back if you're wanting to do that. And if not, then we can, we'll have we're still going to have the presentation here. So yeah, Julian. There he is. The guy with the green hat.
Really? I thought we should do a wrestling match and see who won, which I'll probably lose. I'm Julian Adams. I'm not an alum and I'm not a grad of RPI. I'm actually a Georgia boy. Went to University of Georgia for my master's in historic preservation. I worked at the New York State Historic Preservation Office for 33 years. I took some time off for sabbaticals and other jobs, but I managed programs that incentivized and guide the rehabilitation, restoration, or preservation of historic buildings, a lot of adaptive reuse, a lot of things like the restoration of the Doran Martin House, the Frank Lloyd Wright landmark in Buffalo, things like the Chrysler Building in New York City, the New Amsterdam Theater in 42nd Street, and a lot of little tiny things in between that actually were much more fun. So you have to deal with much pressure from developers and things. But I live up on 2nd Street. And I am a member of the national board, basically to go yay, nay on projects, or say pull me in on some stuff, because I do have a background in structural history, materials conservation, restoration, adaptive reuse, materials, mechanicals, and other things will come up when you ask me the question. That'll pop up from somewhere in the back of my head. But one thing I've been doing for a lot of the neighborhood is a walking tour of 2nd Street, a little bit of history of Troy and some of the buildings as you go up the Washington Park and back. It's available. If nobody wants to go and you want to sit here, my feelings will not be hurt at all. But it's there, or you can do it at your leisure. If you're in town again, just have somebody bug me, and I'm always available to do it. Okay? Thanks. Huh? No, the Doran Martin House. Frank Lloyd Wright designed a whole complex for Doran Martin, who at the time was one of the richest men in America. It's on Jewett Street near the park on Delaware. At the time, it was the only project that Frank Lloyd Wright didn't have a budget for. He didn't care about budgets. He blue through budgets like a stop sign. But Doran Martin just kept writing checks, and Wright said, "I'm going to do more." The house, when it opened in 2004, probably cost almost $1 million. And the neighborhood called it the Freak House because it looked like nothing else in the community. Oh yeah, and state acquired it, and we partnered with the Restoration Corporation, and it opened in the last couple of years, fully restored for tours, with 3 rebuilt sections, and cost us $75 million. So please go see it.
So raise your hand if you interacted with any of Julian's guests last night. All right. So the best part. So Julian is also a board of directors member of our foundation, and he's a big proponent of at least half of the guests last night from the community. So thank you very much, Julian, for that.
This morning, I looked at the farmers market telling me what a great time I had. So thank you for that.
No, that's great. So if you're interested in the tour, Julian will be in the back and then probably start in 10 or 15 minutes. If you prefer to stay here, unfortunately, we really can't do them in series time-wise. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got, like I said, a couple of artists who are working with us on a couple projects or have recently finished a project. And they're going to give an explanation of what they're doing, who they are, obviously, what their experience is, and show what they've been working on or have completed for us. So Jim Lewis, turns out he's on 4th Street, like 4 blocks away, maybe less, who's been making furniture for 50 years-ish. We never heard of him. Paul and I have talked to a lot of people, and he just shows up. He sends in a request for a tour on the CATF website saying, "I'm a woodworker. I do stuff. I do restorations." And And then like 2 weeks later, we met, and a few weeks after that, we gave him a contract to restore the billiards room door. So that's that. And I'll let him explain who he is a little bit more and tell us what he's doing.
Thank you, Ed. A little bit about me. I grew up on a farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. My dad was one of the handiest people you'd ever meet. Before he died, he said, "You know, I have one regret." I said, "What was that, Dad?" He said, "I never replaced wanted to, when he got out of the Navy as a machinist in World War II, he wanted to either open a hardware store or a lawnmower repair place, or I think his dream was to get a water-powered mill and restore it. So he went down to Lancaster looking for water-powered mills. Get on my bike and ride 3.5 miles north and be at Martin Milan's gun shop. That was a stone building, pretty poor shape, that was no bigger than the width of this room square. Right, and see these things. You could see where iron was smelted for the Revolutionary War. You could see where the iron was mined in the Furnace Hills of Pennsylvania. You could go down to Delaware and see sites there or anything like that. My parents were history buffs. They always bought antiques because we didn't have a lot of money, and for some reason the walnut was cheap and the oak was not. So we had walnut furniture everywhere. So that was kind of my perspective. I've always loved history, and I always wanted to get out of Pennsylvania and go to a place where things moved faster. So I came to New York, not New York City, thank you, but upstate New York, which was more comfortable for me. And I've been here for 55 years or so. I very quickly started making water beds for an RPI MECE student who was on his third business at the time. He developed a variation of the dovetail joint, which was extremely practical for stamping together water beds in stick wick and brick wick. And any RPI student who had a water bed at that time bought it from us. We took boards, we sanded the footprints off of them, and we stained them black and made water beds. Before that, I went to engineering school, University of Delaware, where, believe it or not, I was as much of a jerk as any of you guys were at that age. I didn't do things to this door like that, but then we weren't in a building like this either. And that was lucky, I guess. Recently, I've been, the past 6 or 8 years, I've been repairing antiques for a very principled antique dealer who specializes in 15th century Italian pieces. And it's not uncommon for her to say, "Oh, this is a nice piece, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it's beautiful." She said, "The Met has one, but it's not quite this good." Kind of takes your breath away and gives you a sense of perspective. But it's been like a master class for me in how furniture was made and how to work with furniture. I've learned a lot working with her. So with my experience in college, I wasn't entirely surprised by this door until I got it at the shop and started actually looking at it. And if you could cue the slides, Jim. This side's been worked on just a little bit. This is how it was in the shop. This is after a little bit of work. The white spots on it are stainable, paintable epoxy. I've done things like put plugs in here and keep cycling, Jim, just slowly. The door had been kicked in several times. This shows the obviously very new doorknob, nothing like what would have been the original, on top of a plywood patch and go on. This was a deadbolt lock. A bullet catches up this way. Keep cycling, please. I drilled out holes some places and put plugs in, and sized it by the hole. This is a patch going in. Then I go around it with the epoxy, started on the doorknob. I was really looking for a place to start on this because the more I looked at it, the more I realized, wow, what a lot of work. You can see things like scoring from the original hardware, scoring from the new hardware, just construction grade plywood patch that was made not very well. A lot of damage around here, the cracks. Keep going. Internally, the construction of this door is strips of pine laminated together and then veneered top and bottom with, veneered on the outsides with oak, veneered top and bottom with oak, or rather front and back. So this is a 1/4 inch of oak here, and it sandwiches around another piece of oak right here. The side are these strips of pine, and then another piece of oak back here. It's a very stable construction. It will not warp or split or crack, unlike any kind of solid wood, which in this thickness and this width, you would expect to get some movement on. So it's not entirely stable this way, but then the grain of the wood runs lengthwise here, so the expansion contraction due to humidity is limited to this much. So it's the way premium doors are still made to this day. The door was pinned by hinges. 2 hinges is not very many for a door this size, but it was obviously kicked in. There was a lot of splitting. No, I'm okay, I think, in this area here. And I started out by repairing that. If you could cycle some more, Jim, just cycle through these. This is in the process of putting glue in the process of routing out a piece on the other side, where I glued in some reasonably matching wood, not perfect. And got this stable because there was a sort of a floppiness to the door and trying to stabilize that. After I got this all stabilized, keep going, please. By starting to glue, you can see some glue in there and a plug inside, and then I filled that with epoxy, put some more plugs in. Okay, pause here. The door was still floppy, so I found that I had to glue the corners also by injecting glue. Paul was kind enough to give me some veterinary needles that were nice and long so they could reach well inside the joints. I tried epoxy at first. It didn't work too well, so at Prof. Miller's suggestion, I used Titebond 2, which sticks to the epoxy well enough and gets in there and gets the job done. Because it was such a volume of wood, some of these joints took over an ounce of glue. I let it set for 3 days to stabilize. Replacing the hinge, fixing the hinge mortises was, thank you. Fixing the hinge mortises was one of the first things I did because it was easy to do and I knew what I was doing. And so I figured, this is a good corner to start on. Keep going, please. This is in the process of fixing it up. Here's, I'm inserting dowels. Oh, cool. inserting dowels so that where hinges are going to go back there, the screws have something to bite into. There's an extra mortise for a very modern hinge that's not at all appropriate, so I filled that. And there's another view. Oh, let's see. This was where a latch was put in, or excuse me, a towel bar was put in. The molding was cut, so I glued in a block of wood. You have to use setups like that to get deeper clamping. Yeah. Ah,
There you go.
okay. Boink. Wait, where am I?
Put it down.
Okay, well, you put a block in there and then carve the molding to match. I'm not doing too well on that.
Yes. This I button looks like an eye. Just press that. And
I'm not doing too well on them back and forth on the slides.
that's him.
Oh, okay. I get you. Okay. What these shots are showing is there was so much damage on this side that I ended up gluing a strip on here. And this is all of the long clamps I had in the shop at the time because it's a thin strip. Here's a shot of where a ball catch had been placed. If you skip forward, Jim, it shows the layers of splitting. Layer there, layer there, layer there. These are these handy little pry bars that I use for opening things up. Go ahead. So first thing I did one day, I glued this joint here and put pressure on it through the wedges so that I could get that closed up. Then the next step was to open this so I could get glue in on both sides here, forward, and clamp that with this setup. Finally, coming back and plugging. And this was on the damaged side, so I ended up ripping this and putting the strip on this surface. Some places in the middle, for instance, here, there was a split. I don't know how that happened. So since the clamps don't reach that far, you make something strong underneath, something strong on top, a block here. Use the lever. This is gluing a chip into a corner molding, forward, and then carving it down. I want a little bit of appreciation for taking these photos one-handed while I'm holding the prop chisel on the other side. Thank you very much. And believe it or not, I actually didn't stage the chips here. They were what actually came from carving because I'm too lazy to sweep after every cut. But you can see over here, this was where there was a deadbolt lock, and that's patching screw holes with the epoxy and the main hole by putting in these plugs. Now, getting back to this lock area of the door, this shows the patch that I put in on the surface, the strip that I put in on the side, plugs on the big holes, epoxy coming through where the crack is. Pretty ugly, right? Go forward. Oh, okay. This is gluing the joints of the door. Drilling a lot of holes where each of these rails comes into the stile and injecting epoxy forward. You wipe, backward, I'm sorry. Now forward, forward one. You wipe this stuff off to keep it clean, protect your blanket as much as you can, then clamp it. And as you put more and more clamps on, you start to get some glue squeezing out of the holes, which is a very good sign. It means that you've worked the glue in there. In the meantime, I have a clamp that's kind of bent like this, so I use that to lever it. It's probably how it got bent like that. And you squeeze it repeatedly to work the glue throughout all the cracks inside, because due to the nature of those layers of pine, there can be a lot of cracking inside, as well as the face and back veneer being separated. The construction of this joint is that the piece that comes across here has a tenon that comes through, a square projection that comes through to within about a 1/4 inch of this edge. So as wide as this is, about 1 inch narrower, there is a tongue about 5/8 of an inch thick that comes out to about here. And that's where the structure of the door comes. And there was a lot of breakage around there, and that's what I was gluing to fix this. Go forward. This shows a staple that had been in the door, 2 holes, inject with glue. In this case, I used hide glue, which is water soluble and heat soluble. You put it in hot with a hypodermic needle after enlarging the hole a little bit. And in the sanding process, when this is sanded down, that goes flat and becomes pretty much invisible for the color of the wood. It dries to a very similar color to the background. There's another one. Forward. At some point, the door had been varnished very sloppily. And so I was able to take a chisel and just peel the varnish off. These are pieces of varnish here. And this is a drip that hasn't been gotten. There's a little bit of a drip on top of the chisel. And then this is varnish laying on top from the other drips that I got here and here. This looked like raspberry jam. It was water soluble. It was sticky. I didn't taste it. Here you can see I've put water on this area. There's an old woodworker's trick where you have a dented surface, you put water on it, you put maybe a piece of aluminum foil on top of that, and you hit it with an iron set to wood or wool. There's about the same setting, spelled almost the same way. We don't have much of a brain left at this point, so it's simple to remember. And then you run it along digs like this, or this, or this. Well, I needed the wholesale approach for this area, which was, let's turn this around. That's this area here. I needed the wholesale approach for it because there were so many dents. This. I just flooded it with water, let it set for 20 minutes, came back with a very hot iron and a piece of aluminum foil and ran the iron over with the aluminum foil, melting the varnish, but raising most of the dents. Next photo.
That's the regular iron.
Yeah, regular flat iron. It's the idiot-proof version that turns itself off if you forget that it's plugged in. I've ruined a number of irons. Here we see, first of all, I finally broke down and sanded this area here. I put some epoxy along the edge, debating whether or not I should have used a strip of wood there. Down here, there was a lot of chipping, so I put little wedges of wood in and glued an incredible number of wedges of wood. This was the edge that got ripped off later and glued on. You can see a split here that's been filled with epoxy, and at this point I'm starting to stain it. This is the first staining picture. This is after the first coat of stain on the door. I was trying to touch the worst areas. This is after the third coat, where it's starting to even out. You might notice, if you go back, Jim, I'm sorry. You might notice that nothing has happened to the panels at this point, and that's because I need a color match. So I'm leaving the panels the way they were originally and just focusing on the frame. And that's the condition of this side of the door now, because I wanted to show it to you folks here. You can also see little bits of epoxy there, the white, the wood color is where it's been sanded or carved through. This is still very incomplete staining. And now go forward. This is an area that has some things in it. And the paints I use to work on those, these are alcohol-based paints. Got them off of eBay, nothing special, but they do a great job. You can see remnants of a dent there, bits of epoxy there, remnants of a dent, dent. That's a ding. That's actually a hole in the wood that I came back and repaired later. Forward, please. This is around the deadbolt area, and forward, and around the lock area. For some reason, we're not getting a lot of pictures out of order. Okay, go. This is the lock. Go backwards one, Jim. Okay, now forward. And again. Okay. This is the deadbolt area again. Let's see. There is the hole from the deadbolt. You can tell that when I put in the patch, I was about 5 degrees off with the grain angle. And that's mea culpa. I'm so sorry. It was the best wood that I had available. And you can see that the grain is a little bit coarser. I do my best to make that the same. These are medullary rays. They come from the center of the oak tree and grow out. They're a couple cells thick, which is thicker than in a lot of trees. So they're very prominent on quarter sawn oak. And you can see them, for instance, there. You can see the medullary rays in that panel, or here. Some places the floor is rift sawn, which is very similar with the parallel grain, but it doesn't show the rays. It's 85 degrees to 45 degrees. With the rift sawn, it's 85 to 90 degrees. And I'm not describing this well. You look at the end of a log, you'll see concentric growth rings. If you cut a board out of that across the edge, you'll find that the growth rings go like this in the end of the board. That's what you call plank sawn. Oh, beautiful.
This plank, right?
Quartered.
It's quarter.
Okay.
You can draw the rest of it. There's plank, grit, water sawn. I can't remember the rest.
You have these growth rings, which are actually circular, not a spiral, but you know, bear with me. If you cut a board here, the growth rings are 90 degrees. Here they're pretty close to 90 degrees. Here they start getting more like 85. If you cut a board like this, it's called plank sawn, and the growth rings are like this. Why is this important? It's important because when the board dries, the rings tend to straighten out so that this plank sawn board will go like this in what's called cupping, whereas the rift sawn board is only maybe an inch thick, so it's going to go eep, eep. Not at all. Also, the wood shrinks more, less this way than it does this way. So in this piece, you get a lot of shrinkage of width, but in the quarter sawn piece, you get very little shrinkage, half as much in most species. That's one reason why rift sawn is used. Another reason is because of the visual appeal. Back to this. In the quarter sawn, you have these rays, which is the most distinctive feature of oak. Sometimes they're continuous, like this one. Sometimes they're not, but actually these were painted in, so I was just doing a good job faking it. Here you can see, if you look carefully, this is the line of the patch that I laid in. Again, the old growth wood in the original door had much smaller growth rings. They're on the order of a 32nd to a 16th, which means that in 16 years, the tree grew 2 inches in diameter. On mine, it's about twice that. So in 16 years, it grew 4 inches in diameter, but that makes my wood a little coarser. It's hard to find wood like this. It's much easier to find wood like this. So what I did was paint it in. I did some painting to stain the color so it's similar, and I'm not quite done in this area. If you look closely, you can see little bits of this oranger color. This is all painted in. This is painted in down here. It's only been stained. It hasn't been darkened like this or this or this, and it doesn't have the rays painted on it. So that's going to happen later, and that's right over here on this piece. You can come up and see it later. This is the patch that I put in right here. This is where the original lock was. This is where the deadbolt was. The door is upside down at this point. So back one, yeah. This is a shot of the area where all those dents were, and you can see dent, 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 dent. This is after the iron trick raised a lot of the dents, going over it with a very fine sandpaper, 500 grit sandpaper, and then doing the staining. Next photo. This is the same area after doing the painting, and this is pretty much done. I'm going to let this go. I'm going to work on this a little bit more. That little thing I'm going to let go. That little thing I'll probably work on, and I'll probably work on that. But there's a lot that's gone out of here because of just a little bit of glaze, very thin paint that goes on there and brings the color into the right realm. The next step after this is going to be spraying shellac because it's an alcohol-based paint that I use and a water-based stain. I don't want to do anything water-based or alcohol-based that use. Next photo. Oh, okay, that's it. Boy, you folks lucked out.
How many hours did you put it to the door?
Well, my first estimate was 15 hours, 20 hours maybe, and I'm at 46. Yeah.
They count doors in the house.
We have at least one guest, so it'd be great if the question was audible. Lori will be the Anna.
How much did that door weigh? What's the weight of that?
More than I can lift, I can tell you that.
Something you can lift.
It's a hefty one. And then you look at that one next to it that's 14 feet tall, or you look at your front door that's an extra 1.5 feet wider. You got some big ass doors.
All the pocket doors.
Oh yeah, they're wide and tall both. Yeah. This one's a 2-person job to move it.
How on earth can we afford you for all of this? You're treating this like a $1 million violin.
I asked him to do that. Paul and I both said, this is a door, we want to see what it takes to do it right. And we'll figure out how much it costs, and then we can decide on all these other doors. Where do we go this level? Where do we go a different level? 3rd floor in the back? You know, we're probably not going to go to this level unless somebody wants to donate $1 million or something, you know. But for the first door, and it's going to be a prominent door because we're going to use that room as an assembly area. It, you know, the murals will get done, all that room will get refinished. So we figured, let's do it right this time, and we'll, you know, gulp a little bit with the money. But I still think it was the right decision. I didn't want to go halfway and say, well, we should have done this or tried that. So that was my fault, Jim.
If I could also speak to that. I'm a diehard Trojan. I've been here for 55 years and I really love this town and I love what it has and I love things in it. My history with Payne House goes back to my former father-in-law, who was a plumber. He apprenticed at Skirmerhorn Plumbers back when they were in the basement of the Troy Savings Bank. He got a call to come here when the young master, Payne Jr., was in Europe. The butler told him that the pipes were plugged upstairs. So he, being an enterprising young plumber and happy to do things on his own, opened up a trap and stuck in an 18-inch cold chisel and tapped on the obstruction until he broke a hole through the wall in the next room, dumping raw sewage on the floor, which he and the butler then had to mop up, and he had to patch the wall. And I think he got a pretty strong talking to at some point there, but they pretty much kept it from the owner. I'm not going to go looking for that patch either, because I don't want. I appreciate the Payne House more than you can imagine, and I'm really happy that it's here. I've been in some incredible mansions, Hudson River Valley mansions, I forget the name of the guy who built the railroads to Key West down in Florida. Him. And to me, this is on that level. You know, it's up at the very top. It's the finest furniture that I've worked on, house size. And I sincerely hope that I don't have to fix everything wrong with this place, because I am not going to do it. I don't believe in gilding lilies. I want to show you guys how to fix the parquet floor so you guys can do it. But I really support your efforts to do this, because I think it's amazing that it's in Troy. And I think it's amazing that you're opening it up to the public, because there's so many times I walked by and really wanted to see it, and not see it as a haunted house, but see it as a mansion. And I can imagine someone coming here for a wedding and doing the ceremony down here and having the bridal room upstairs and having their family stay in some of the bedrooms upstairs and doing it all in one house. And it's here. And my God, the pictures of that service are incredible. Or corporate retreats or whatever, you know, whatever the event is. I think you guys are on a really great mission here. And having been that jerk in college, I'm so impressed that college guys are buckling down and doing this work. It's really something to see.
So Jim, we have a lot of well-meaning work party helpers come on weekends every 6 weeks or so. And when they come, they often use bulky items, ladders, other things, and they could be bumping into this precious wood during their well-meaning other efforts. And so the idea is for us to be reminded about this intensity you have for what it should look like, and to avoid making further damage. And the idea is to encourage each other to bring two people to pull, even though you could lift the ladder yourself, maybe you should go get a buddy and do more careful movement around the house, so that we don't end up making more dents that we then have to fix. It's not a question, but it's just more of a statement that
went south of the posting kill, south of the canal, as we say here. He said, I never went down there without carrying a red Murphy in my hand, which was a brick, because you never knew what Irishman you might meet. Well, I live in South Troy now, and if any of yous bump this door, we're coming up here.
You mix your own shellac?
When I brush it, I use commercial shellac,
Right.
already mixed. I haven't gotten button or flake shellac yet and done that, but my next call, as I get to that point, is going to be to Zinsser, which is a big shellac producer, and talk to their technical people
Right.
and ask them about spraying shellac, which I've never done.
Right. Okay, thanks.
I'll probably be using button shellac. Shellac was recommended to me by a friend who has been doing finish restoration for a lot longer than I have. She said it blends very well with the old varnish or the old lacquer and the old shellac. Shellac is the customary underfinish for lacquer. Now lacquer is not what lacquer used to be. It's nothing like it. So I wouldn't be using a modern lacquer, and I'd really hesitate to use a modern polyurethane, which I use on most of my other furniture. I think it's going to be shellac and a nitrocellulose lacquer, but I haven't figured all that out yet.
Yes, can you give a suggestion for cleaning the wood around here? Now that you've seen some, like a preferred way that we could. Well, also, yeah, like a solvent or any kind of cleaning agent.
I think toothbrush and pledges is the traditional way. Seriously, I would start out with water or soap and water because that's the most gentle solvent. And I wouldn't flood the surface with water. I'd use a little bit. Then you run into different solvents. I tried cleaning it with alcohol, and alcohol didn't do much to the surface. So that's fairly safe, but it's not likely to be taking off things that you want to take off. Water with a bit of soap is much more likely. Paint thinner is pretty inert to finishes. And that's generally pretty safe. Varnishes don't redissolve. Lacquers can, but they tend to do it slowly. Old shellac redissolves very quickly with alcohol. New shellac dissolves less quickly with alcohol. I'm not sure how they've changed it, but it's not quite the same. If you make your own shellac with the buttons or the flakes and alcohol, that will dissolve very quickly. And if you're drinking a mixed drink and you sneeze, the droplets that get on your finish will actually ruin it. So I would never leave shellac as the final finish on a piece like this. It's just not safe, especially if it's shellac that I mixed myself. But nitrocellulose over that has been pretty safe and pretty tested.
So paint thinner, interesting.
I find TSP is excellent for removing the dirt and crust from finishes, paint on varnishes and shellacs like this. Have you tried TSP?
Yeah, they have it at hardware stores, or Pasano across the river has TSP. Is that how you did that?
Yes.
So, excuse me,
Yeeks.
soap and water is generic, and I know you can use certain. Is this a Dawn application or shaved up Dove?
Dove probably has cold cream in it or something similar. Dishwashing soaps are kind of aggressive, but I would use a little bit of soap, or since Prof. Miller said TSP, I would start with that because that's essentially a soap, like a soap in its action. Sir.
Soap is what the chemist calls hygroscopic. If you don't clean it thoroughly, it absorbs water. I personally, when I do a little bit of this, I don't like to use it around metal. TSP is basic. You're not going to rust your material if you don't clean it thoroughly. Clean it off thoroughly. That's why I tend to go with TSP.
I would
But
follow
the other
that.
solvents you mentioned, soft, I mean, you got it.
I would follow that advice. That sounds good.
What about like hard wax finishes? Like I've used like Rubicon Monocoat on furniture. It's really water resistant. It's like good, you can color match it.
Do I use hard wax?
Yeah, like would that be a
After I would lacquer or varnish, I would, yeah.
is it, like because a lot of the applications they get to be straight to the wood and you only get one shot at it. So it's like it's usually like something that I've tried it on furniture, but to really you have to know what you're doing. But when it is the coat is super hard and it doesn't like it's good for like if you spill a drink type of thing. It's not gonna ruin anything.
If you do something that's even as intricate as this door and certainly as big as this door, you'll find that you have a lot of problems maintaining the same surface quality.
That's exactly what I had a problem with. Like trying to make sure I get the right amount on it at the same time.
And that's a killer
Like
because
absorption.
you put the wax on and you take the wax off, and your cloth or steel wool or abrasive pad loads up, and so it acts differently.
Yep.
Between one end of the piece and the other end of the piece. And if you start over with a fresh piece, then it acts differently than it did in the middle.
Yeah.
It gets to be a real mess. But if you do a very thin coat, even a tinted wax will just fill in the minor scratches and really help a lot. Typically what you do with a sprayed finish is you try and leave a perfect finish. So you do your sanding in the second to the last coat and before, and then you spray on a relatively heavy coat. If it's something, this doesn't work with polyurethanes or with waterborne, but with solvent-borne, you might spray a coat of a little bit of just solvent over to let things flow out. Those are typically solvents with a very low surface tension, so it doesn't puddle up or pull back from a pore or an edge or something like that. So it'll flow better. Then what you do is, if you can, you don't touch it. If you can't not touch it, you work maybe with steel wool or a Scotch-Brite pad and a little bit of wax on it, and that'll knock off any little surface crud and leave a smoother finish without putting excessive scratches in it that would polarize the light so that it would, you know, change color as you spin it around in a light.
That's exactly what I was having a problem with when I think. So.
Okay. Got to cut it off, but we're going to move on to the next presentation. I'd like to thank you.
You can hear me? Yeah. We've got. All on achieving. Right? Goal number 1 is the house. Goal number. Open up it and share it. Last night was amazing. Right? And for me, where should I? It's on. Okay, where should I stand? It's okay. Can you see? Okay. Yeah, is the other mic on? For me, I just learned so much from Jim's presentation on the store. And so I learned things talking with Julian, who just gave the tour. I learned things in a 10-minute conversation as I was flipping out because my presentation wasn't getting loaded. And also last year, I made a connection with the architects that did the review, the condition assessment, and we're in touch. So thank you for keeping me working. Because last night I was telling Gregory that my real dream is to become a truck driver, and he has experience, and I might do that too. But here we go. What I'm going to do, I see some new faces. So I actually have the my exact presentation from last year with the addition of images and video from the work that I did this summer. I'm not going to go through everything, but for anyone who did not see this last year, I have it on my iPad and it works. And we could just step aside later and I can go through everything and give you all the details. So I'm going to buzz through a little bit, but a little bit about me. Yes, I grew up with Keith Gargiulo on Route 8 in New York State. And I brought my friend who grew up south of us. And
That's gonna be the most important.
oh, that we're still friends or what? I worked for 21 years in the lab doing technical support and teaching for an acrylic company called Golden Artist Colors, which is in our village. It started there in 1980. It's been around for 40 years. I am a professional decorative painter, and these are the trade associations that I'm a part of. And I did attend the Great North American Party circa 1991. And I've been here many times. So those are my credentials. And last year I suggested, because in conversations with Ed and Paul and Keith and then Jim, I understood that you have a great task at hand. You've all been working on it for decades. And I thought, you know, coming from the restoration side, wouldn't it be great to give you guys some ideas about how I've been taught to approach different spaces and how to restore. And so I created this presentation about 3 or 4 different ways that I've actually worked on other buildings. And it's not me alone, there's a team of people, and the way we think and the questions that we ask. And last night I asked someone who said he was going to be here, but he's not, he asked me 2 really great questions, and Keith Gargiulo is filling in.
I got his part.
Yeah.
This first question was, to what standard should we be renovating? Actual, the 1890 authentic materials made in authentic ways back to that time, or look and feel of the 1890s, or update to modern? How do you decide?
Right. How do you decide? And that was the point of my presentation last year. And that just reinforced, you know what, you guys are, I know that between last year's reunion and this year's reunion, you've made great progress. We've got new people that have been able to come. And again, these are the questions that you have to answer. So I thought, you know, why not? Like, go through it again, and it could give you more information and ideas for conversation. So how we make decisions, how do you decide where and what point and you approach your restoration? Primary factors are use of the space. How will you use this space? Individual spaces, the budget, of course, and materials required. And that's really about the philosophy. Like, you know, how far back do you want to go? How to approach the castle, here we are. So this is before and after pictures of what was the butler's room. And I know you call it like a powder room, the only bedroom that had a bathroom. But this is where all of that loss was. The color was gone. Any space that you see white, that the paint just fell off over time or grayed out on that plaster. And this was after. And you can see the room. This is me finding that little bit of gray adhesive that you guys put your posters up with. Every college kid did. It was up there. I pulled it off. I couldn't believe it was still there. So one of the approaches is materials first, aesthetics second. And for a real reason, this is Hyde Hall. I've been working there since 2017, collaborating with Aaron Maroney from Peebles Island, and Julian worked with Aaron all the time. So this building has no heat in it. It was built and owned by the same family from 1817 until 1963, when the family couldn't afford it anymore. And New York State wanted to get its hands on the property to create a state park. So they negotiated a price with the family as it was. purchased it, and they were gonna dynamite it. So, an instant, and they pulled out all the electrical, all the heat, all the plumbing, everything. It had the first flushing toilet west of the Hudson. That was gone. But, and it's never had heat since. And it sits on a hill between Cooperstown Lake, Otsego Lake, and a peak. So it's in New York State, guys, right? Like, so there's snow and rain and tons of moisture, and it's brick and limestone construction, which acts like a sponge and just pulls up all that moisture. And in the, like, as soon as New York State bought it, a collection of concerned citizens from Cooperstown formed a nonprofit organization called the Friends of Hyde Hall, and they tried to do projects for it, including repainting the walls. And over time, they used latex paint. So with all that moisture, it just popped all over. They also fundraise, and that's how I get to work there, from getting private donations. So this is a room where I mixed up actual calcimine or distemper paint and painted the walls, and kept, Aaron Maroney had me keep a piece of wallpaper. There was wallpaper here in the late 1800s because that was fashionable. But in 1831, it was painted this color with calcimine originally. So in this project, they wanted to take it back, they've decided to take it back to 1831 using original materials. Okay. And if anybody has questions, feel free to ask. The next space, this was the first space that I worked in at this building. When I walked in, it looked like this and this. So in the late 1800s, it was fashionable Victorian era for dark, rich colors, right? But in 1830, it was marbled. So in this case, I had to, again, mix up my own materials, actually using lime putty, and I had to experiment, and I drove 4 hours to Lancaster, Pennsylvania to talk to a lime expert, because a lot of lime comes from there, and then to Vermont, to a plaster expert to figure, and then create a testing protocol to know that whatever I developed would last for a full season. So you have the moisture moving up through the wall and then it drying out and all of that kind of stuff. But I also had to get to their aesthetic, because originally the walls had been plastered and not painted. So with the action of a trowel, when you're applying the plaster, there's a sheen that develops. You know, you're actually burnishing the plaster. So I figured out how to use balls of plastic and to burnish up this lime wash so that it looks like plaster. And this is me completing this finish in the stairwell and other spaces that they had painted. So the second approach is do no harm. Don't repaint over history. Basically, just do what you have to do to make it look better. And this is a bell at this church, St. Ignatius Mission in St. Ignatius, Montana. It's just north of Missoula. So that's a painting of the church with the Mission Mountains. And this was the 60-foot scaffolding up to the peak. And the priest took me up to the bell that was made in Troy, New York. So yeah, so this this project was for this church that was built on what was Lake Missoula, and it was a sand bed. And over time, since it was built, it shifted, the brick construction shifted. So there was cracks developing in the plaster, the painted plaster over the lath. And these paintings were made in oil, and there were just crazy amounts of cracks. And there's this new technique similar to what Jim's doing with the door of injecting water-based materials that will glue the plaster back to the lath. So you can keep the right materials, but we are putting in modern. And all these little holes that you see in the imagery, that was where the injections were actually drilled. So we had to do some damage to the painting to save it. And then it was filled with plaster. And then my work was color matching, color and sheen matching. And this whole idea of don't paint over history and the continuum of the life of this building is like, if you look at Jesus's hands, how beautifully painted, those were original. At some point, there's proof, here's the proof that it was touched up at some point, because do you see how poor this hand is? You see that red outline? So my job was not to repaint that hand, but because it's part of the history of the building. And just more images. And here's the Hotel Saranac, a total repaint. Because this is a commercial location, this building was built in 1926 during the Roaring '20s, and that's when, you know, vacations started. So this building is now it was vacant for a while, and this was oil paint over plaster, and you can see like how again lost, just like what happened here in the butler's room. There was moisture issues in this beam here. This beam held all these pipes like sewage and water, and when it sat vacant in the Adirondacks, it froze. And the water just destroyed this beam. So this beam was actually completely replastered, and there was no decoration left. So I had to create a stencil, and I used Sharpie actually just to get the marks on there, and then repainted everything. This is what I walked into. There was a lot of the paint just gives up. It's just tired in certain spots. So I color match it and repaint it. But in the total repaint, it was because of the use of the space. This is now, I hope you all go. It's a great little hotel in Saranac Lake, and you can have a drink at that bar and then look up, that's what I do, sit and look up at the beams. But it was completely repainted. Go ahead, Jim. So we might just skip past this one, but this is a good one. But oh, here we go. Back to the beloved castle. And so you all recognize that. And yeah, you can see this is a before, right? What it did look like and what it did look like. There was, you know, I got to meet the fire department a couple times, and we wanted to try to save some of the material. So this was the canvas, and this is before I adhered it to the wall. And the video.
Sure.
So, right. So I do want to say that I know where I'm weak, and I'm weak and technical. Okay. So I'm actually hiring someone to help me. I have so much content. I have so many videos and so many images. But so this was me this summer working on the spice room. And this is just an example of how I traced the pattern. We do have images, right, of what it did look like. Sure.
OSHA here, right?
Right. Nobody's recording this. Yeah. So, all right. Maybe not that video.
We did eventually get rails.
Yeah. So I arrived, and the scaffolding. Yeah. I continually learn. I need to ask, are there safety rails on the scaffolding that I'm being provided? And I called Ed. I'm like, Ed, can I buy safety rails? He said yes right away, but they arrived like the day after I finished. So this is me adhering a piece of oh no, this is me painting the canvas. So there's another video where oh, okay, it's okay. Yeah. Wing it. Yep. Yeah, just I color matched. I was choosing a color that was in the field of the ceiling, and that's it. That's all you guys see. My butt going up and down that scaffolding. Like, oh, this is a good one. This was tough. this, like, all right, the other thing that was happening on this job was that it was the hottest week of the year. So I'm working on the ceiling without safety rails and above my head. And but Ed got an air conditioner. That was awesome. That saved me. But what I did is right, because this was painted canvas. The spice room is painted canvas, just like it was very common. And I think that just like in the butler's pantry is painted canvas, it helps keep the plaster in place. And there was water damage, and Pavel, his crew, filled the plaster. And so what I did is used a wallpapering technique. I brought primed, ready to go canvas, adhered it, brought in, that's what you're seeing, the existing painting, and traced it, cut it in place, and then glued it up. Yeah, it's technology, but I have a idea. I'm gonna be able to share a better presentation for all of you. But the other thing, there was a lot of stains because and this is actually water-based paint. It was painted canvas with the calcimine or distemper, which is made of chalk, pigment, and animal hide glue. It's water soluble. So what I had to do is be very careful to not remove any of the original painting. But I also learned that with a subtle technique of using a fine mist, just of water, spraying that paint, and I could resolubilize it, move it around, and soften it. So one of the goals was try to get rid of just whatever the stains were that have created a splotchy look on that canvas. And so that video was me trying to match the field because of that splotchiness, like this and this, there's a lot of highs and lows, darks and lights. So using glazes, just like Jim's doing to match the wood grain, just blending it. And then I used graphite paper and tracing paper to trace that flower and vines from the opposite corner. Because I had to look at it, and if you stand and look, you can see that there's a certain movement and a design to each of those floral elements in the corners, and brought it over, traced it, and then, again, for me, it's simple. It's like math, color matching it and get the feel of the painting. I practiced and then went up there and did it without safety rails. So what this is me getting a workout, right? It's a baker scaffolding, guys. Like, it shakes all the time. So I'm like, stabilize myself. And then I'm like, so it was a good workout. Yeah, that's it. Yes. I do. Does anyone have any questions about what you just saw? Yeah.
Was the original done freehand, like an artist just got up there, or did they have, like, they do a scale thing and then kind of transfer the design up, on a grid, or did you get any sense?
That's a great question. The question was, how was that design originally created? From the decoration that's around the floral, it's all like the trompe l'oeil. I could see that it doesn't line up perfectly. I think that painting was made in a studio somewhere and brought here. So when you get to stand in that room, there's a couple of elements on the street side and the stairwell side. I'm calling them olives, but you can see that they're not lined up off the crown molding. That yeah, so that's interesting. I think usually those kind of all of that could have been done not with stencils but with cartoons. Just like I did, I traced the element and then it is hand painted. But it was part of the production, all of the stuff produced. The Gilded Age employed so many people like me. It was a wonderful time, for all of us. But yeah, it was a normal thing. There was a production house making those kind of paintings. And yes,
Were there 2 layers of canvas on the ceiling that you applied?
no, I don't think so. It was single, but from what I could see. I did replace the canvas. I could have painted directly on the plaster and done all that color matching and things, but you would have seen that edge, right? Because there's a gap. And so that's why I applied a brand new piece of canvas and met it flush for where the, the problem was, up against that edge. So I don't know if it was George, somebody like, he was here this summer and someone said it, and I'm gonna give him the credit. Like he walked in and looked at it, he said, it looks like it's always been there. I'm like, oh, thank you. That was exactly the point. Yeah, any other questions?
Another proxy.
Yes.
Say, you wanted your opinion about what you would do with the movie wallpaper.
Oh, right. So that's where, so in my thing I brought that doesn't work, I took a still of the title from the Gilded Age. So there's this whole next section of my presentation. It's all about gold. And another thing that I was doing for Ed, they asked me to look at the window area, the frieze, yes, in the parlor, because of the water damage, that pink paint had, buckled, and it was just coming off, and we got a ladder over there, and I was literally picking it off, and I saved some pieces that are in the cabinet to the left of the fireplace. And instantly I just saw some gold. I couldn't believe it. So I texted these two, Ed and Keith, from different eras. I said, what do you remember? I said, I've made a discovery. And what do you remember before Scorsese started painting in here? This one got back to me first, and he said, listen, all right, it was the 70s. There was a red shag rug. That's all I remember. I said, fine, I understand. This one said, well, I remember a lighter color. I can't tell you exactly. And yeah, I sat and watched the crew repaint everything. And that's when I said, well, there was gold under that paint. You should check the contract. Were they supposed to redo this? Because so if you go in there, and I'm going to share a write-up with photos that Jim can share with the alum. And when I saw that, it also made me realize in the spice room up on the crown, there were 3 small courses of metallic. And I wasn't sure if I was seeing metallic or something else. And one of the organizations that I belong to is the Society of Gilders. And I just went to their biannual conference in Asheville, North Carolina. So there's a group of professional people that just apply gold to everything, whether it's architecture or framing. And I brought the castle to the conference. And because these two were the first to be like, uh-oh, this, the parlor is full of gold. It's just under that paint. What do we do now? We already have budget, fundraising, mountain of challenges in front of us. Strong step could be just to redo that one section between the columns, from between the window and the door going into the Moroccan room. Because as many preservation, restoration experts say, and try to remind people, and this goes back to his question, like what standard do you bring it back to? Yeah, that this house has a history and it's a continuum. That room would cost.
The idea of redoing that to original doesn't terrify you.
It absolutely should. But what is reasonable, I mean, something has to be done with it now because it looks bad. But so you guys have to choose. You know, the job was originally just go in there and touch up the dings, right? Make it look good. And so I color matched and provided the colors. So you can go over to the Ace Hardware here and buy the paint for your next work weekend. And, you know, and I did. Right? But the others, so that was the parlor. And then in the spice room, going back to that color, I stumped two experts. I said, it looks like it's pewter. And they said they used to make pewter leaf, or it could have been pewter powder. And my recommendation is not to restore it, but just recognize that it's there. And I have some good close-up videos or pictures of that pewter in the crown molding. But what's unique, and this is what these guys have never seen before, is that rope, right? In the spice room. Like I told Paul, I said, when I met with Paul and Ed last year, they said, yeah, that was original on the painting. I'm like, I thought, no, wait, it's just weird, you know, that rope. But when I got up there and I was inches away, I could see on the painted canvas where they had like painted the spot where that rope should be applied once it was installed. The decoration isn't painted underneath the rope. So it's absolutely part of the design. I've never seen anything like it. And and other people haven't either. And it also that it's pewter and it matches the 3 ribbons within the crown. So it's interesting. I mean, it just adds to your story of what a jewel this place is. Yes. Well, and
Value of the gold at 150,000. As a side comment.
right. All right, Prof. Miller, are you talking about the parlor or the spice room? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Yeah, and it's called flash gilding. And you could do that in either spot. Yeah. Yeah.
I doubt if you walk in there and say, well, that looks different than that. That's the problem. I'm not a restorer. I repair antiques, but I always run into the problem. Restore with wood, count the number of growth rates per inch to get the right growth rate.
Right.
You know, that's important. Looking for effect. What kind of stain do you use?
Yeah. Well, I would say that you're not wrong. You're never
But
wrong.
you gotta get the show on the ring.
Well, and there's that, and it goes back to the approach. Yeah, I mean, this is where you got to have this conversation. And it's difficult if this isn't your field. You're all experts in so many things and you care about this building, and you have to come up with a philosophy. And that's a great segue, but I wanted to read something. And I had a slide, Keith, of the library in New Berlin, New York, because we had issues, challenge. So now this is crazy. So my note, I took a quote and my note isn't working. So this is like a technology nightmare day. But it was a quote from Erin Maroney at Peebles Island. And what she said is historic buildings need to be appreciated. And to do that, they need to remain relevant. So her quote was about choosing colors for an exterior of a library in our little tiny village that doesn't matter except for to us. But you need to recognize that it needs to be relevant, and you also have all these goals to meet, budgetary, use. And that's how you make your decision. And it's often philosophical rather than technical. So that's where I'm giving this idea to you that it's yours. You can do what you want with it. And I know you want, and it goes back to his question about what standards are you going to work towards. There's really no right or wrong answer, except if you're going to destroy this place, right? That's wrong. Anything that you're doing is good, but you have to meet your needs and goals. So yes, we could use gold paint on anything here and it would be okay. I actually, at this gilding conference, I got to listen to a presentation from a restoration expert at the Biltmore, right? The Vanderbilt home in Asheville, North Carolina. She works in, they have a whole like team of people, 25 people restoring that place full time. All right. And she talked about using gold paint on certain sconces because that place is ridiculous, right? Gilded Age, like all of their sconces are gold, but they're not going to put gold on them. They're going to use gold paint because it doesn't really matter. But she purposely does it in a way so anyone coming after her can see what's real, what's not. So that's an approach as well. So, yeah.
They are long, sorry.
And I suppose I should talk about restoration. The living room ceiling came down in the 80s. A quarter of it came down completely and the rest was damaged. The first thing we did was set up scaffolding. Can you hear now? Yeah. All right. And noticed that they had drawn in pencil center lines on the ceiling relative to the center. So we put a Cartesian abscissa and ordinate on the floor and dropped plumb lines and recorded where all the major pieces were. So in doing that, we had the vines, the curvature of the vines. We didn't accurately record where each piece went, but we knew what the frequency of large pieces versus small pieces were. Then we took down the rest of the ceiling. That ceiling was originally plastered, and in those days they put canvas over, which was to hold the plaster, which would crack eventually. So Paul Safran and the guys, I guess Paul was the ringleader, put up sheetrock. The wrong thing to do, but you will never know that. And we primed it and used a red, the color was red, it was a latex liquid rubber. We painted on the various roses and pieces, made molds and poured them with plaster of Paris. The trim running around the edge, we made a long mold, and I remember the guys complaining because I told them every time you come back from class, pour 6 or 12 of these. And they were going nuts doing the whole thing. Anyway, when we went to put things back up, we used our measurements on a plumb line to actually draw those places where we're going to put the vines up. We tacked in, I've forgotten the cord, whether it was hemp or jute, but one of them we noticed would expand when it got wet, so we couldn't use it. In any event, we got all that up. We didn't worry that we were using metal tacks because we thought it wouldn't rust through. Probably a mistake because I think we used latex, but at the time I didn't know, but I do know now. And we put up the vines, we put up the major pieces, and the way we would do it, someone asked me today, we would, and I'll just demonstrate. If you wait a little bit, the elmers would tack up. We used elmers because if there was future water damage, it wouldn't matter anyway. And the room was restored back in the 50s by Herman Solomon. I got a nice story about him. Bob Burbank here? Yeah? Okay. You have to ask Bob because Lori asked me, she thought the white background wasn't original, but it was a textured thing. So you might follow up with Bob Burbank. He's from the class of 58. And the guys used gold paint to finish it off. That ceiling, it was fun to do because I would come in sometimes during the week, but on Saturdays we had 4 or 5 guys I'd work with. An advisor, you kind of listen to the gossip going on, and which was very important. You keep your mouth shut and you listen, right? And that worked out very well. Any questions about the ceiling? Okay. I worked, did a number of the pocket doors. I knew someone working at Allegheny Ludlam, so I gave him 2 of the castings and he had them cast. So we have steel in some, there's welded in some. Originally they were cast iron, which fractured. Unfortunately, the rails on which the rollers went, they're very interesting rollers, if you can imagine. You have a bar and then you have 2 wheels with an axle, and the wheels are about that diameter. And on these 2 pieces of wood, they were 2x6s. And they were planed, as a matter of fact. And on the wheels would roll, and the axle, the 3/4 inch axle would actually roll on a bar. Okay. Unfortunately, as the wood wore, the wheels would tip in, and we had a lot of problems restoring some of the doors. Paul tells me that one door is falling off, which I had worked on 40 years ago with the guys. Sorry to hear that. That means I may have a job. The Moorish room, the guys all thought was tooled leather. It isn't, it's plaster. Some of the pieces came down, and I do have pictures. I'll send to Paul and he can send it out to you guys. But it's very interesting if you I would experiment what they used here. They may have done something like that. So that was the second ceiling we worked on. I got started on the one behind me in the balcony, and Mrs. Danish actually did the work, but I made the molds up and showed her what to do. So those patterns are, if you go up and look, they're repeats. And she was a little nervous about how to match them. I just said, measure the repeat, and every time you move, if you have to cut a little bit off, you fit it in. We looked at the old ceiling and nothing was really perfect, but your eye doesn't pick that up if you don't screw it up too badly. But the whole ceiling came down, and I believe it was plasterboard. You know, Paul, I don't remember anymore. Yeah, was it glued back up?
The edges of the canvas around the outside were the only thing holding it up.
Oh, but did you take it down completely?
No, I did it after me.
No, okay.
I was hanging when I was here.
Right, that's from the Danish. That was highlighted in like 96.
But she came in and did all the work and paint. I don't know what paint she used, probably a latex. But you have to use spectroscopy to find out what your materials are. Herman Solomon back in the 50s, I was going to ask Bob Burbank about Herman. Herman did the windows, all the stained glass repairs, reproduced the ones in the balcony. He was an engineer type and just enjoyed doing this. He went in Connecticut to antique glass places and got antique glass and was very meticulous about what he did. He also was an artist type and restored the painting in the living room. And that painting is on plywood. I think we used a Sobo glue to put, he remounted it on canvas, I think. And then we used Sobo glue to fasten it to the plywood. And the plywood has two brackets. I think, say, going in this direction, and there are two brackets in this place, screwed or whatever, the edges in, and finished it off. So that can be removed very easily on the plywood without wrecking the picture. Herman said, tells a story. He said he painted, restored the ceiling, and he used plaster of Paris. And of course, plaster of Paris sets up very fast. And he said he learned to add a little scotch to the plaster of Paris. So I kind of figured Herman had a shot of scotch for the plaster of Paris and a shot of scotch for himself. Although he never admitted that. Had a good sense of humor. I'm sure I would have said that to him. The Age of Innocence came along when I was here. Oh, boy, were the guys happy. We were going to have a movie here. We were going to meet Michelle Pfeiffer and Day, and the only person that talked to the guys was Mrs. Mingott. She was a nice old lady. I told him, I said, you won't get near these people. They're very fragile people. Well, the 1 week that they were going to be here turned out to be 3 months, I think it was. And the guys were getting fed up. But it started off when the representative came around and said, we're going to offer you $8,000 to use the place for whatever, 1 week. I said, yeah, I said, I don't own the place. We have to contact the alumni corporation. So I called Gordy and he said, call David Murphy. He's a lawyer. David said, Ken, you want me to take it? I said, sure. So he came up for Housing Corps and he told the guy $40,000. Well, they negotiated down to 25 and David had a $10,000 escrow account put in, which wouldn't be released until everything was done. And he said, Ken, they're going to make 3 payments and you got to collect the money. They're going to leave town without paying. So on every date, you're supposed to get the money, get it. So got the first payment, fine. Got the second payment, fine. Third payment, days late. What am I going to do? Be tacky to contact Scorsese, but I knew who was second in command and I walked up to him and I said, we haven't been paid yet. If we don't get paid, I'm shutting this operation down. And I turned and I walked out. We were paid in 10 minutes. And I told David, Dave had our, what was it, 50th for you guys? Here. He said, oh, I don't remember that. I said, sure, I told you on the phone. But David was very good, very professional. We're lucky to have him, believe me. And I guess he renegotiated what's going on now with the RPI and all that business. Well, the guy who was in charge was mad at me, but he said at one point, he said, you know, I love this. I'm not this way. I just don't talk to people this way, but sometimes you get a little irritated. He said, you know, we did a lot for this place with all the curtains and all that. I said, yeah, we had red curtains in the living room. I said, it looks like a whorehouse now. Anyway, we did okay. They recovered the chairs and one thing I was very bothered by, and I have a saying about screw guns. I watched them with their screw guns. I say, if you have a screw gun, you can screw anything up. They would just put the screws in the white oak and split it, which is terrible. In any event, a lot of nice things happen. The guy said, never again do we want to have a movie here. Although, of course, I guess the Gilded Age, there was nobody in the house, living in the house basically, or what?
Yeah, no undergrads. There's
No undergrads, yeah, okay. So any questions about,
Got a couple things.
yes,
Not so much questions about construction, but more
Yeah.
questions for you. The better, I don't know if everyone knows the period of time you've been with the house.
oh, well, when I was teaching physical chemistry in the 70s, there were 6 pi caps in the audience, and a cap came up. He said, we're looking for an advisor or something. I became chapter advisor about 75, I forgot. And Gordy Wright at the time, he said, this is a burnout job. Then somehow I was promoted to chapter advisor. I don't remember when. You know, it kind of morphs into, and till 1997 when I retired. And during this time, there was a peak when, I mean, the guys are always enthused, but when the ceiling came down and after my job began to be holding back on the reins because they were anxious to do and get started on a lot of things. We accomplished a lot. My son in the audience here made up the in the far corner of the parquet in our basement. Made everything out and came and glued it in place. So he did one of them. And that's a job. And I noticed the movie company didn't replace some of the parquet in the hall, but rather painted to make it look like parquet. Okay, so you'll see that. The problem you will run into, I think, with the woodwork is that it's of various thicknesses. Originally, I think this was 1/4 inch or 5/16. Turns out when the chemistry department was renovated, we had permission to salvage. And I took all of the quarter sawn white oak I could find because I knew it was special. And I have about 20 strips like this, but unfortunately they're 2 inches and not 2 1/4. They do match the hallway, but I'm going to turn it over to Jim. My son and I have been doing turning for Jim for a couple of years, so I know him. I mentioned the castle to him, and he came down, and the damn fool got sucked in. It's a labor of love, and last week he gave me the spiral that's upstairs, and he said, "You do it," you know. So I'm trying to set up to do it. It's a challenge. I like projects which are a challenge like that.
And you don't know, bring to some of the overhead.
In the
Taking a cylinder of wood, taking like 90% of the way wood away from it.
Yeah.
And not break.
That's from the swinging door that used to be
Oh, yes.
to the basement.
And in the bathroom too, there's this stuff.
Here, whoever saw it up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So who's the oldest guy here? 1960? Yeah.
I know I'm not the only one. That was on the hallway over here.
Yeah, right before you got, and it was past, you went past.
Yeah, I think so.
It's like a saloon door. You can always hinges right there. Never opened and closed.
But it's always the end of the wall.
Very ornate.
That's the problem.
Think of the stairways. Think of the banisters, but in a flat panel, probably about an 8.5.
Okay, you asked when I came on board. It turns out Grant Palsgrove died within 3 days of my starting here. So you got a date, right? If it means anything. Any other questions?
Thankfully, didn't.
Well, you know, it's called lack of experience. It was fun. It was.
Now you have experience.
It was fun. Well, you know, in my life, I changed what I do. I started out to be a machinist. My dad said, learn a trade. I was interested in math, so I did drug design and computer technology. And then I retired and I went back to do everything I went to college to avoid doing. I do woodworking. I made all the doors for our house. I mean, I know exactly how to make a door like this. I don't want to make one again. I've made 25 of them, but I have some wood which might be suitable. And I know Jim has stock too. So I've been helping him out, sharpen his planer blades and go down, and I've given him some white oak, nice stuff. I don't want to get rid of it particularly, that is burn it, but I want it to be used somewhere. It's very special wood. This is from 1910 and 1920. When we built our house, I priced quarter sawn white oak. And it was $13 a board foot, run of the log. You get it rough off the log and then have to deal with it. I don't know what it costs today.
There were a lot of projects you worked on. Those were a lot of the big ones of that time frame. What was your favorite? What was your favorite thing to work on in the house?
What was my favorite thing? To tell you the truth, it was the front ceiling because we had 4 guys every Saturday and I just enjoyed listening to them. You learn a lot, you know? You don't learn a lot at meetings because all of the politics and everything that's supposed to be done comes in there.
You said you told them to come back from class and pour molds every time. But I heard.
Oh, yeah, Paul, you did a lot of that. Paul complained a lot, right? Oh, you hated it. How many did you have? There were 6 long and
Yeah, I mean, your memory's better than mine.
we had a couple of them. Well, they're all challenges, because it's a problem to be solved. You know, you have to, well, like the Billiards Room. You have to stare at it a while, then it dawns on you just need 2 panels. You don't do the whole ceiling. And the living room too. It's done stepwise. Because you do the layout work and from there it's ad libbing. Of course, it's not original anymore. And I'll give you a bit of philosophy. When people ask me to make something for an antique or something, I'm going to tell them, once I touch this, it's no longer original. Okay, and you have to go in with that in mind. And after you think about it, you realize, so what? Every 10 years, repeat costs anyway. To preserve the feeling. Most people. My father would say about any repair, you and I know, but if we don't tell anybody, they won't know. Okay. Not that you have to cheat them or anything, but you have to take a reasonable stance on all of this. Other questions?
$23 a board foot. Soaked it up.
Hmm?
$23 a board foot for quarter sawn white oak right now.
Really? How? Yeah.
One.
And I bet quality like, you know, if you don't know, you can recognize when you look in antique books at the furniture, you can see from 1900 whether it's ash or white oak. And that ribbon pattern is a dead giveaway. And then the problem the guys are going to run into, you can't run this stuff through a planer anymore because it's brittle. It's old and dry. You have to run it through a sander. I don't even know if you can hand plane that stuff. The thing about woodwork, when you get a piece of wood and you start machining it, you know which way to go. But once something is done and you don't know that anymore, you may tear the grain if you try to remachine it. Other questions?
Some way to catalog what parts of the house remain or we.
I mean, I think we have a pretty good idea of what is original, but there's some areas where we're not sure.
Right, but I'm saying, is it recorded? No.
I don't think we've gone through that level. I mean, the condition assessment that was done, they didn't really do that kind of assessment. They did a condition report, not necessarily that kind of historical.
The thing you can see about the wood is by grain pattern, you can pick out what's been restored. Or I will tell you, I spot immediately the first step in the staircase, and I think the 4th or 5th one. the grain is wrong. I shouldn't put it that way. I know it has to be done for safety and all. I don't know. I wish, I would say I wish the old stair had been saved because that was quarters. Has it been? Good. Oh, yeah. Yes.
There is a practice that you could actually document. This is a project. It could be a, a work weekend where you go through room by room and you identify what's original, what's not original. And I shared a report that a preservation consultant shared with me, and I've been using that practice. Like when anything is done in the house, you assess it and you write out what the conditions were, what you did, the materials you used, and it's good to have photos before and after along with that document. And then going back to your suggestion, Jim, about having people, carry ladders together in that kind of practice, there could be a document that you guys read, maybe just to remind yourselves before you arrive, this is how we're going to do things when we're in the house. Everyone's going to, all tall ladders are going to be carried by 2 people rather than 1 because y'all can do it, but stuff happens, like just a practice. It's really just about a practice. And the last thing I want to point out is, Professor Miller, I got the opportunity to walk through the house with you in July when I came for the work weekend. And he was the one that suggested to me in the spice room, the encrusted wallpaper, there's some sections missing. And all I did was try to color match the background. He said, well, why didn't you use a stencil? I was like, oh my God, I'm a certified stencil artisan. I didn't even think about it, but I could have created a stencil and recreated that pattern. I wasn't thinking, I was only thinking about the ceiling, and then I got involved. But it goes back to Jim's request, his question, what to do about the parlor. That also, a stencil can be created from whatever pattern. If you have photos of what that room used to look like, you can create a stencil, and it's pretty quick and not that costly to recreate the pattern with paint or a material. So
Thanks for the credit, but I forgot what I said. It was off the cuff. Anyway, I mentioned to you, if you ever do any wallpapering with paste, ask me. I got my father's kit and I helped him wallpaper. If most of you have never wallpapered, I got to tell you a funny story about wallpapering. My mother said, Dad's working hard. Let's go over to Grandma's house. Grandma had a back cottage and we had to wallpaper it. I did a beautiful job, no question about it. Dad walks in later in the day and he says, Ken, you hung the paper wrong. How do you know? Because you started in the corner with a full sheet and I know the walls aren't long. So you got to keep all of this in mind. And when you work with someone who makes these comments, may not have made a mistake, you pick up pointers. And this place is hope you have enough people around who talk. You do. It's been fun. Other questions? I'm working with Jim or bugging him. I'm going to give him a present. I sharpened his joiner blades as a guinea pig. I did it. We made a new sharpener. And my gift to you was to help you out and keep your enthusiasm up. It takes a lot of gumption and enthusiasm to keep working here. It's never ending. That's the thing. Other questions?
A little bit of a non sequitur, but I got to be house manager under you and Archon, and I got to say, Prof. Miller, I learned way more from you than any class up on the hill. And there's so many life lessons I got from you. I cannot thank you enough. for the time and dedication that you put into this place and to the students that were here, right? Your comment about listening, I, I would come in with all these stupid ideas and you would just let me talk. And then you would like a little subtle hit and there was the answer, right? You didn't have to, it was like you had the force or something, right? You know? So I just want to thank you personally, because for me, that was very helpful as a student. And I use the knowledge gained from you how to fix so many things around the house today. So thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Really appreciate it. So we're gonna do a presentation on projects in more detail, as I mentioned earlier. It's getting a bit late. I'm probably just gonna do a Q&A. If there's anything specific questions about projects that you've seen us have worked on or plan to work on, I'll let you guys ask those questions, and between Paul and myself and a few other people, maybe we can answer some of those questions rather than go through another 45-minute presentation. I think everybody's getting tired. So yeah, among other things, we can walk around. Obviously, Paul is a great tour guide. He's even got a tour thing somewhere. So that's probably a good way to do this. I think if you guys want to walk around, Paul is a much better speaker than I am. Yeah, you're fine. We could do two groups and just walk around and kind of explain what we've been doing and having people ask questions ad hoc. I think that probably would work best. Jim here.
Want to be at boat side at 6:30. And then if you're late, we won't. Wait. Boat side at 7, leaving at 7:30? Yes. Thank you. The thing is, we're going to all lie to you for about a half hour so that you're all on time. But then we lied twice and we got confused. So Kim knows everything. All right. So that's really irritating if you get there early. Yeah. All right. So the point here is you're boarding at 7, but okay, you're boarding at 7. But please come a little early so that you don't make us wait for you. Whatever.
There's still some beer over there, I think so. Okay. Yeah, I think why don't we go ahead and do that? And